Well, this is Pastor Mike. I got my coffee. Let's talk leadership. Now, we've come to the place that the Pharaoh is about to let the children of Israel leave Egypt. Moses has again, remember all the time, go all the way back to Abraham. God promises a promised land, hundreds of years. Then the children of Israel end up being slaves in Egypt. Now Moses has shown up. And from chapter 6, where Moses first asked that Pharaoh let the people go, we've gone all the way to chapter 12, and Pharaoh has not yet let the people go. Now, in chapter 12, you get this moment where God does send the angel of death, and he takes the firstborn of everything, cattle, people, everything. By doing this, he defeats the final God necessary to convince Pharaoh that God is God and he is not. You know, in our lives and in the world around us, it is often difficult to convince people that there is a God and they're not him. Our society, everybody in our society, in today's world, our people around us really do function as if they are their own gods. They function as if they are such free moral agents that there's really no power above them. And this causes all kinds of conflict and discord in our world and in our cultures. But this does exist. And so basically that's where God has to get Pharaoh to. God has to get Pharaoh to a place where Pharaoh realizes that there is a God and he's not it. And so when Pharaoh finally realizes that, he's now ready to let the children of Israel go. Now, we talked last week about the fact that God, that Moses had to have the people prepared to move when God finally said move. When Pharaoh finally said move, they had to be ready to go. That took time. That took preparation. In the end, they were walking out of Egypt. Think about this. They were walking out of Egypt with nothing. They had nothing. They were slaves. It wasn't like they were going to take their savings account and carry it with them. It wasn't like they were going to take all their jewelry and all their gold and all their treasures and take it with them. It wasn't like they had anything. They were slaves. They were literally going to walk out with the clothes on their back and enough and as much food as they could carry. And listen, they were going to walk out into a desert. Understand that. It's not like they're walking out and they're going from this town to that town to check into the next hotel. They're not doing that. And it's not like there's only a few of them traveling. Some estimates put them as high as 2 million people were about to walk out of Egypt with nothing. And can I just tell you that's a bad plan? Can I just lay out the fact that there's no way that should work? And yet that's what God's about to do with them. Now, when you look at it from the surface, you would say, well, this is a bad plan and should not be attempted. You would say to yourself, they don't have the resource to move forward. And so many of us get caught in this. So, let me be very honest. I get caught in this. New Life is a church on our main campus that has about 1,800 to 2,000 people that attend church in our central congregation every week on our main campus. We have other campuses, other places, and church plants all over the place. But in our central location at our main campus, 1,800 to 2,000. You say, well, why did you stop? Why did it stick at 1,800 to 2,000? I can answer that. The answer is really quite simple. Our building can seat 700 people. And so we can get to 1,800 to 2,000 by running 3 services a week. And even then, we only have one in and one out, one way in, one way out from our parking lot. So 1 lane in, 1 lane out. So when we offload the parking lot, it takes forever to offload the parking lot with 700-800 cars or 500 to 600 cars, coming off the parking lot. Because we may have other churches meeting on our campus at the same time, and they're offloading at the same time, and all the traffic. Why are we at that number? Because I didn't think we had the resource to do better. I was looking at our church when we built the last sanctuary we built. I was looking at our church from the standpoint of the resources we had. rather than from the standpoint of the resources God wanted to give us. I wanted to spend our time today talking about remembering God's math. I need you to understand that God's math is not like our math. God thinks differently about things. We do math, or I do math anyway. I'll just blame myself. If this is not you, don't be offended. I'm blaming me, just me. I think in terms of what I have and what can I do with what I have. I might get a little bit wild and say, let me think in terms of what I will probably have after this event or that event, and let me think through what is likely to occur, which might give me more. But I'm always living inside of what is likely or what is actual. The problem is that leaves me limited to my capacity, to my content, to my ability, when God's math is so much different. See, God told the children of Israel, I'm going to send you out. I'm going to set you free. And they suddenly are about to step out into a new reality where they need to survive in a world, in a desert, in a place where resources are not available. They're going to have to organize themselves. They're going to have to lead themselves. They're going to have to police themselves. All of that was done for them by the Egyptians, and now they must do it for themselves. And all of this must be done with no resource, or at least it would seem that way. They're willing, everybody watch. They are willing to walk out of Egypt with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Understand that. They are not hesitating. They are going to walk out of Egypt with nothing but the clothes on their back. They get that. They are willing to take the risk. They're willing to go. And then it says here, watch. I'm in chapter 12, verses 33 to 36. Watch this. This is after. Watch. The firstborn have been killed by the death angel. All of the Egyptians are, as you can imagine, they are frantic. They are desperate. They are hurt. They are grieving. The wailing and the grieving coming up out of Egypt is just immense in this moment. And Pharaoh says, "You've got to go, get out, go now." And then it says here, the Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country. Get out and get out now, go. Because they realize, look, in an ancient mindset, when something like this happens, their God is bigger than our God. Their God has cursed us. Get them out of here so we won't be cursed anymore. That's how they're thinking. And so they're like, get out quick. They urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. Do you see it? So the people took their dough before the yeast was added. God had told them to do that. Take dough that has not been leavened, that does not have yeast. And they carried it on their shoulders in the kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. In other words, what they have is their clothes, and they have as much food as they can carry. And they've brought food that will not easily or quickly spoil. See how this is thought through? Now watch. The Israelites did as Moses instructed. Now, this is pretty awesome. Remember, I got to tell you, don't forget this. God told Moses to do this, all right? The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold for clothing. In other words, we don't want big old bricks of gold that we can't carry, but we want all the gold you have that could be put on clothing, jewelry, those kind of things, because we're going to watch. The Lord had made the Egyptians here. Sometimes the Bible gives you an understatement. Here's one of them. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So the Israelites plundered the Egyptians. Watch. Think about this just a minute. When God delivered the Israelites from Egypt, He sent them out not as a broken, discouraged, impoverished people. He sent them out as a conquering nation that had just plundered the Egyptians. And think about what happened in Egypt. What happened in Egypt is Egypt lost its cheap labor force. Egypt lost its wealth. We're going to find out in a few chapters that Egypt lost its military. The Egyptians were decimated, and it did not have to end this way for them. They were only decimated because they refused to do what God had asked them to do to start with. God was forced to force them to do what was right. And instead of simply doing what was right, God was forced to force them. And when they forced God to force them, he broke them entirely. I need to tell you, you don't hear a lot about Egypt throughout the rest of this Old Testament. And I got to tell you, I believe it's because they were so broken and decimated by this moment that it took them centuries to recover from it. The Egyptians have lost everything when the Israelites walk out. And the Israelites, don't miss this, the Israelites are willing to walk out with nothing but the shirts on their backs and the food they can carry. But because of God's blessing, they walk out with the wealth of Egypt. Now, I know in a modern mindset, you're thinking, well, that's not fair. They shouldn't have done that to Egypt. Egypt had stolen their labor and had stolen their lives for generations. This, my friends, was justice being meted out on the Egyptians by God for generations of oppression and generations of stealing the value of the labor of these people. God made the wrong right. God had the Israelites get their payday when they left. And that's part of God's math. God will always provide for your needs. Listen to me. If you are really called to what you believe God's called you to do, God's always going to provide for you. But you've got to be careful. You've got to, when I say these things, it's like, all right, God's going to call. I'm called to, let me make something up. I'm called to build a 90,000 square foot building. It's going to cost me $35 million to do it. Okay, wait, hold on. How many people you got in church? 500. Okay, no. You said, what do you mean? You just said God will provide. Okay, let me teach you a lesson here. This is the main thing I want you to get. This is the one phrase I want you to capture through all this. You must find the balance. Listen to me. You must find the balance between faith and presumption. You cannot presume God's blessing in a moment that was not part of God's call. However, if you're living in God's call, you should not underestimate God's capacity. I underestimated God's capacity when I built a building that would only seat 700 people. Our original building we had drawn was twice the size of the one we actually built. Well, why did I cut it in half? Because I was afraid. Decisions made out of that kind of fear are almost always the wrong decisions. And they limit your capacity, they limit where you can get to. I made that mistake. Don't make that mistake. However, I know people who had congregations of 800 and 900 people, and they built a 2,500 seat sanctuary, and they spent the next 20 years fighting just to try to keep the sanctuary sustained, and the sanctuary limited the capacity of ministry. That's presumption. I lacked faith. They presumed on faith. You cannot do either. You can't do either. You've got to find the balance between faith and presumption. And this is really, really tough. Listen, I need to say to you, God will always provide for what he has called you to do. Period. Have faith. But always be careful that what you're doing is actually what God called you to and not just what you want to do. God's not going to fund your pipe dream, but God's not going to fail to fund what he called you to do. And you've got to find the difference in those two. I think honestly, when I say that I failed to have faith, I think there's truth in that, but I think there's only about half truth. I probably should have built that building about half the larger than I did, which means about a quarter smaller than we planned. Because quite frankly, the bottleneck at the highway would have been a nightmare if I had built the full-size building we had planned. And so that would never have worked. But the truth is, just me, okay, just me. You're better off to show enough faith to move forward safely than you are to show so much faith that you step out in presumption. I just have to tell you, presumption is almost always deadly to a movement or a ministry or a dream that God's put in your heart. If you presume something so huge, and then you get out there and you can't fund it. Even Jesus said, nobody goes out to fight another king unless he does the math and says, can I beat that king with the number of soldiers I have versus the number of soldiers they have? Because if he does, he'll be a fool. No one starts to build a building without asking the question, do I have the money to get this done? There's some math, some human math that happens here. But then there's also some God math. I can tell you one area where we have not failed to have faith. When we plant churches, we simply bring in a pastor. We let the pastor preach from the pulpit. I share the pulpit with him. I actually leave town for a couple of weeks usually, and he just preaches. He or she just preaches, and then we move on. And anybody that wants to go with that pastor goes with that pastor, and anybody that wants to stay stays with us. You say, well, that's risky. Well, yeah, it is. We planted a church years ago called Healing Place Church. Pastor Mo Diggs planted the church. And at the time, we were averaging right at 2,000 in attendance every week. Pastor Mo preached for a while, 2,000 in attendance every week. Pastor Mo left and took 250 people with him. Okay. You would expect that instead of 2,000, our attendance the next week would be 1,750 because that's 2,000 minus 250. Instead, Mo had 275 people at his launch, and we had over 2,100 people in attendance and stayed there. The truth is, that's God's math. You can't prepare for that. You can't presume that. You can't demand that. You can't force God's hand to do that. But when God's in it, that's the way the math is going to work. I guess what I'm saying to you is, you've got to be extremely careful when you step forward like this, that you are stepping out in what God's called you to. It's awfully hard, leaders. It's awfully hard for us to divide in our minds and in our hearts what our dreams are versus what our call from God is. Sometimes our call from God is so much bigger and our dreams are so much smaller and we miss the best. But sometimes our dreams are way here and God's call is here. And we've presumed on his goodness and God's just not going to bless that. I'm not telling you to downsize what God's called you to. I'm telling you to think through it. Be careful. Take time. Watch. Here, I'll give you this. Gather all you can. Do all the work possible to get everything together that you can. If you're going to build a building, raise as much money as you can. If you're going to hire staff, make sure it's covered as best you can. If you're going to expand ministry, if you're going to expand your business, if you're going to get a new location, gather all the upfront resource you possibly can. But once it's time to jump, you got to trust God for the rest. And if it's truly his call, he's never, ever, ever going to let you down. You say, Pastor, where'd you even learn stuff like that? I learned it in very small places. When Tina and I were in college, my wife and I were in college, we had our first son while we were in college. And I can remember times when we didn't have food in the refrigerator. And I've got a wife and a baby child, and I have no money. We were both working part-time. We had no money. We had nothing. And I can remember praying about that thing and saying, God, I'm not sure how we're going to feed the family today. I got this much in the fridge, and I can make this meal out of this, but I don't know about tomorrow. And I remember God, not an audible voice, don't get me wrong, but somehow it came to me, go check the mail. And I walked out on the front porch because back then in this little town, the mailbox was literally hanging on the front porch, and the mailman would walk up and put the mail in. And I opened the mailbox, I took it out, and in the mailbox was an envelope. And in the envelope was a check for enough to buy groceries for a week. And it was from somebody I did not know. It just came out of nowhere, and I have no idea why. It was just there. I got to tell you, over the next 2 years as we lived in that house and as we worked part-time and struggled, That moment repeated itself over and over again. Why? Because God had called us to do that. God had called us to be there, to study for ministry, to prepare ourselves to do what He had created us to do. And He provided at every turn everything we've needed. It's always been that way. My fears are generally not that God won't fund something, but I have a great fear that I will be presumptive on His grace. I don't want to outrun God, and I don't want to fall behind God. But finding the balance between the two, that's a tough choice. And listen to me carefully. Making tough choices like that is why you're the leader. You got to let God lead you so you can make those choices properly. And when you do, God will always come through.